I think we'll just go ahead and get started. All right, so this is I am really excited to kind of do this series. It feels like a whole bunch of things coming together, so I'm able to start doing some leadership training with folks again. Um, this session, as well as the six others that hopefully you see on the screen that we have planned, are designed to stand alone if you can only attend one. But they also do kind of build upon each other a little bit. So this one is starting just kind of with the basic definitions and the leadership competencies, and those will build on each other. But also, if you miss a few or somebody comes in later on, you can hop back in. And really, like Becky and I were talking, because Becky's gone through some training with the Leadership Center. It really does. It's kind of about learning terminology and figuring out how you yourself interpret those terms and would speak about it. So that's probably the biggest difficulty that people have with this content. So, but once again, interactive. So if there's questions about anything, stop and let me know. The dates of the specific sessions are there. We will hopefully be sending out a month before the next session registration information. So Charlotte has been sending out at least monthly emails about continuing education opportunities. And so definitely register for those as those opportunities come out. So put those on your calendar and please attend. And hopefully we'll be recording and sharing content of some of the future webinars. So we're going to launch a poll just to kind of get started. So like I said, the content that we're covering is based on KLC, or Kansas Leadership Center work and materials. And so I'm launching a poll just to kind of get a feeling of where people's familiarity about KLC. So have you heard of Kansas Leadership Center, yes or no? And then let me know if you've participated in any trainings or webinars from KLC or any other affiliated group. So hopefully you guys can see these on your screen. So it looks like, majority have heard of KLC, but the majority haven't participated in any training. So, all right, great. That just helps me know like what content we may or may not be able to skip over. So that's helpful. So slide is not. There we go. So today's session is on everybody advocating anywhere and anytime. And so I just to let you know, kind of some of my background. I first learned about KLC when I was a MSW student, an intern at the agency formerly known as SRS, which is now DCF and KDADS. I was in the mental health department. And so they had a contract with Wichita State University to provide leadership training to the mental health department. And that focused on, they really wanted to focus on improving leadership in the provision of mental health services throughout the state, but then also in how we can lead mental health providers in improving quality of services and those types of things. So over the course of my internship, and then that turned into a job, so that was like the next 6 or 7 years, I was blessed to be able to learn from Kevin Baumhoff and then other Kansas Leadership Center fellows who were working at Wichita State University, and they provided training to us over those years. And then took a little bit, I left state government work, and then, a few years ago, then I was working at DECA and was reintroduced to the Kansas Leadership Center. And I was able to participate in, it was a little bit over a year worth of training directly from Kansas Leadership Center, which resulted in me earning what they call the KLC Level 2 Certificate Teach Leadership, which lots of people do that, so that then sets them up to be able to do some future training and get certification in coaching and other things, which I've not progressed on to do. I'm interested in learning this so I can share kind of the concepts in the current job and the work that we do. So I'm able to kind of put myself out there as like a trainer that knows something about the Kansas Leadership Center definitions and principles, as long as I say I don't represent the Kansas Leadership Center, which I don't. So I just kind of earned a certificate from them. And they're always kind of constantly modifying their materials and everything. And I'll show you their website and some resources that are available there. But my career as a licensed master level social worker, with my specialization in advocacy and administrative practice, has really allowed me to have varied experience in leadership and advocacy and administration, which gave me lots of really great examples that kind of aided in the learning of these principles. So I'm really excited to get to share this all with you today. And so just as a reminder to you all, you really do get out of kind of these types of trainings what you put into it. And sometimes, like myself, it takes me some time to kind of process and think through things. So make sure you're doing that, but then also ask your questions and share ideas and things that you have. There really is no right or wrong answer. It really is just about exploring the concepts and becoming more familiar with them and sharing our experience. So we will get started. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the handout that we emailed out. We're gonna go through all those questions today. So like, I'm the type of person that likes to know what's going to be asked ahead of time to kind of think through things. So hopefully you've had a chance to do that, and if not, that's fine. But this is the definition from the Kansas Leadership Center. So they define leadership as mobilizing yourself first and then others to make progress on what they call deep, daunting, adaptive challenges. So once again, this highlights there are probably some terms and definitions that you folks might not understand or you might not be clear. And one of those is adaptive. So I kind of wanted to take a few minutes to talk about that before I get into the questions, because the concept of technical and adaptive is really foundational to this definition and all the concepts that the Kansas Leadership Center teaches. So initially, when I first learned these concepts, the Kansas Leadership Center talked about it as technical versus adaptive, like kind of they're in conflict with each other. It is what people got out of it, but they've adapted themselves and changed the way they talk about that. So now they talk about it as really distinguishing what's the technical aspects of a challenge versus what's adaptive pieces of that work. And so their definition is technical is something that's a problem that can be solved by an expert or an authority, where adaptive challenges versus a problem is something that, it's a problem or issue that there's no clear solution. It's a little bit more complicated. And I guess one of the ways that kind of I like thinking about it is that it's, if you're familiar with the concepts of necessary and sufficient, so most challenges or problems worth working on have technical and adaptive components, but just doing the technical pieces is not sufficient to fix or make progress on the adaptive issues or the problem as a whole. So the further details within each of those definitions. So technical problems, it lives in people's heads and in kind of the logic or problem solving parts of people's minds. It's really focused on facts and expertise, and people with the problem or someone from the outside can come in and do the work and fix it. So and it does require well-exercised authority and expertise to fix a problem. But on the adaptive side of things, it really has to do with things that live in people's hearts and stomachs. So it really does have to do with what do people value, where do your loyalties lie, what beliefs do you have. That really, it complicates the issues. So it really kind of gets people's emotions involved in it, as well as their values. And so people with the problem are the ones that are doing the work. And the work really is about learning and changing. And it does require leadership, so taking action to make progress on things. And then it usually has to do with something that concerns you the most or whoever's involved. And then oftentimes the solutions are elusive or just challenging. Like, once again, there's not a clear solution. So Kansas Leadership Center, they have this chart that they put together to just kind of highlight or summarize the difference between technical and adaptive work. So once again, technical is kind of more the mind or thinking part of it, where the adaptive work really engages the heart. But for both the solution and the problem with technical work, it's clear. Where on the adaptive side, it requires learning, and then the folks who are doing the work, if it's technical, it has to is an expert or an authority. So you call the plumber, you call the HVAC guy. They come, they know it. They're the IT specialists. They come in and they do all the work. Where if it's adaptive work, there is no expert really. You can come in to fix the problem. There might be experts that can help inform the work or how you're going to move forward with it, but they don't know like the answer or the exact time frame or timeline that everybody needs to follow and have a plan on how to fix it. The type of work, if it's technical, it's usually pretty efficient, so pretty quickly moving, and or at least what time frame it's going to be completed in. And adaptive work, it's really about acting experimentally. So you're going to try something that you think is going to work, and then you check in on it to see if progress has been made and make some changes to what you're going to do next. And the timeline for technical work is just as soon as possible, and adaptive work, it really it takes a longer time to do the work. And then once again, I keep kind of using this language, but with technical work, it's about fixing a problem, where adaptive work is about making progress on a challenge. And then kind of the attitude that people can come to when they're doing the work, or would be helpful when they come to the work, is technical work. You come to it with confidence and skill, or hopefully the expert who's going to be fixing it has that confidence and skill to fix it really well. Where adaptive work, hopefully you are coming to it with confidence and maybe some skill, but it does require curiosity. So what do we not know? Who else needs to be involved in doing the work? How do I need to change? How do other people need to change in order to make progress on the work? And so I think when I've presented this work or these concepts in the past, I kind of like using an example of, if it's technical, a good example of that is, if you're going to the doctor, somebody's broken their arm. So they know how to set that arm, and they have a prescribed method of recovery and recuperation for breaking your arm. And they have a pretty good idea of how long that's going to take based on your health and that type of thing. But if it's something that's more adaptive, which are usually the things that are a little bit more challenging for people, usually is a health issue that's related to people's diet, right? So you might have cardiovascular disease or high cholesterol or something like that. So that takes changing people's behavior. So they're going to have to change the way that they eat, the way they exercise, and that is a huge adaptive change. There are perhaps pills or medications that people can take that can help with that, but that's not going to fix the underlying problem. So that's kind of a good example that I like to share. So I don't know, do other people who are familiar with this work have other examples, kind of technical versus adaptive work that they'd like to share with the group?
I like the story that's in the book, The Common Good, from Kansas Leadership Center. This is Becky, sorry. I think the example they gave is your car has brakes that aren't working right. And so you take the technical aspect of that is you would take it to the car mechanic and have your brakes fixed. You're going to an expert and there's a technical problem and things get fixed. But an adaptive version of that story is you have an 85-year-old parent who's living with you in your home, and they're driving your car. And when they drive the car, for their capabilities, they drive with their foot on the brake, and that's wearing down your brake. So you can either keep going back to the car dealership or the car mechanic and getting your brake fixed, but what you really need to fix is figuring out how to get your parent to stop driving with their foot on the brake. And there's a lot of different things that need to go into that. A lot of different questions and approaches that you might need to deal with to get that little problem taken care of.
Good luck with that. No way.
That's a good example. Great. So, just real quick. I mean, I think one thing, people are like, well, why is distinguishing technical versus adaptive so important? And so I think that's one thing that the Kansas Leadership Center talks about is, if you're going to apply a solution, you're going to sometimes we tend to apply a technical solution to an adaptive challenge, and that just makes it worse. Or the best case scenario, it just makes people more frustrated because that thing that we said is going to work isn't working, and why isn't it working? And so kind of wasting time and making people frustrated. And then in our culture in the United States and other cultures, there definitely the pressures of let's get this done right as soon as possible. Everything moves so quickly, and there really is high pressure to get things fixed as soon as possible. So even just the language that people use when it comes to challenges and social issues puts pressure on us to make fast fixes to things. And then, like I mentioned earlier, most complex problems are a mixture of both. So figuring out how to address the problem and make progress really does you're going to be more successful if you can identify which pieces are going to be fixed in what order and using what technical approaches and adaptive approaches. So hopefully that helps you understand what's his adaptive language there. So going back to this definition then of leadership, of mobilizing yourself and others to make progress on deep, daunting, adaptive challenges. Does anybody have any questions about any of the terms that are used here before we move forward into some of the other group discussion?
I don't have a question, Eric, but again, I'm kind of just recognizing that, like you just said on the last slide, most problems are a mix, and if you're, like say, you want to improve your health. Well, I could just, and I hate, like the word just is kind of problematic. We could just get more physical exercise or just eat better. And it's almost never that easy, and so there, even in the technical solutions, there are some adaptive things, that are making it complex. And so then we do ask why it doesn't work. And I think all of our, I think CASA cases are a really good example of that mix.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely. Yeah. Because certainly if, the challenges that our children and families experience, if it were a technical easy fix, like all the resources that go into child welfare system, it would have been fixed by now, right? I mean, yeah. So yeah, and we'll get into that. And that's
I'm sorry. I just kept thinking of just the whole COVID and surviving the last year and just some of the adaptive and technical changes we've all been forced to do over the last 12 months now. So anyway, I mean, everything I think of is through this lens of COVID anymore.
It's true. Yeah, a very, very relevant example that we're still in the midst of, right? Yeah. Very good. So, I mean, so yeah, as you review this definition, then, and how would you reword the definition, or what comments might you make to bring out how this applies to the advocacy leadership as being a CASA volunteer? How does this relate to our work?
You ask really good, challenging questions, Eric. This is a tough one for me.
Is it? Yeah.
I think, and this isn't a knock on it, but it just a reminder, that this is something that has to, we do every day. We have to mobilize ourselves every day, every week, every month, because adaptive challenges don't just go away. They have to, we have to, we keep checking in on our cases and everyone involved, and, things change. And so it's just kind of I don't even know what I'm looking for here. I guess my brain is fried enough that I can't come up with the right word. Not constantly mobilizing yourself and others, but consistently maybe is a better word.
I can follow. I agree, Diana. This is Susan. I see the focus being on progress instead of a aha moment. That it's just how you set your expectations when you're looking at the problem when you use this definition, which I think really does apply to our work.
Yeah, I have a friend who one of her mantras is progress, not perfection. Yeah. And I think that that's easily something that can apply to, pretty much anything in our lives, especially this.
Yeah, both of your comments, Diana and Susan, that makes me think about, there's the long-term piece of it, but then the focus on the progress, and then that makes me think about how difficult it is then to like grant write and have conversations with funders. So because everybody wants the simple, like, you're going to do this thing, and then all the kids are going to have these wonderful educational outcomes, right? But like we have discussion during staff meetings all the time about it's so individualized and so specific. So one kid, we could say that his goal is to graduate high school by the end of the year. But another kid, maybe he's not even, like, so we talked about this as one example, like he's not even participating in class. So like, let's get him to sing during choir, right? So what the progress is so individualized, and that makes it so much more difficult and challenging. So so let's get then into the principles of leadership, which definitely help kind of define even better what they mean in their definition of leadership, and then kind of dive into maybe each one. So the first one, leadership is an activity and not a position, I think is one that really challenged me when I first started learning about this definition, because it's like, oh, well, because just the language in which we use, especially in the United States. I mean, we just went through a presidential election, so we talk about that all the time, about we are electing our next leader of the United States. And not to say that, they're not practicing leadership, but just that close connection between people in positions of authority being the people that lead kind of leads to the understanding that then, other people don't lead unless you're in like a position that has authority. Which isn't necessarily true. So Kansas Leadership Center, when they put this definition together, they're really kind of challenging people's thinking about, well, how can you still practice leadership and act in a way that mobilizes yourself and others in a way that makes progress on things, even if you're not in that position of authority. So, one of those topics of the future sessions is really going to be teasing out this concept of what is the overlap between leadership and authority, and when do people have authority but aren't practicing leadership, and all of those different buckets if you're looking at the Venn diagram of those two concepts. So we'll talk more about that, but as I think about that particular principle of leadership, that's kind of what I think about. So so let's just pause there and just think about how does that specific principle impact the work, or how you think about being a CASA?
It seems to me that leadership is, well, the best leaders create leaders in their group, and helping create leadership amongst all the different entities that are working with your child, helping everybody feel like they're a leader in their little department is a pretty important thing to do, to get results anyways. And a lot of that is about giving credit when credit is due and being kind and generous throughout the process.
Yeah. That's good. That makes me think about when I talk about how wonderful our volunteers are. It really is kind of about that. You all are great about developing relationships with people. That kind of gives you the street cred to then like call people out or make the requests of things that need to happen. And there certainly is a level of authority that you all have, right? I mean, there's a specific Rule 110 within the Kansas State Legislature, or the law that allows you access to confidential information and to be assigned on a case and to submit court reports. But that doesn't get you in everybody's door, right? It doesn't allow you to order things that you want to make happen. So you do have to kind of figure out, how do I lead, like you're saying, Evan, those other people that are involved in the case to lead towards this recommendation or thing that we want to happen. So yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts about being? Yeah.
Sorry. I think one of the biggest obstacles in leadership is that we don't always get the attention that comes with being the leader. And because of that, we often don't want to take the responsibility that being a leader has. But it's really the leader in the group that sets the tone and really how the group determines how they're going to act and engage with each other. I used to have a receptionist who was very dominant. And when she was having a great day, the office was a terrific place to be. And when she was having an awful day, we just stayed in our offices. And she was, the bottom of the rung in the authority line, but she was definitely the leader. And I think
that's a really good example. Yeah.
That is.
We get this idea of leadership as an activity and not a position mixed up all the time, because I say, okay, I'm not in charge here. You just go with it anywhere you want to, Eric. I don't care.
Right.
Well, yeah. But that also, I think your point speaks to some of our kids who struggle so hard in school or in placements or in group homes. Their behavior makes them the leader because
exactly
they get the attention. They've learned quickly how to assume a leadership position by their behavior, by their usually negative behavior. So maybe learning how to channel. I mean, if we recognize that in the kids that we serve, then that might be something to think about with them.
And Maggie, the fear of being in a leadership role for others, they just don't want anybody to even know they exist sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think even leaders can be in that position fairly often. I would definitely like to not be a leader all the time.
Evan, that's your job as caterer. That is your job.
I'll tell you, my staff, I have so many great leaders on my staff that will be in the middle of some sort of crises, and they turn to me for a solution, and I'm like, I thought you guys were going to handle this. Why aren't you leading right now? So occasionally I am surprised to discover that I am still the leader of my team because they're all so competent, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably speaks to, your skills and ability at being a good leader, because then you're empowering them to make decisions, right? And do the work. So then, so then the next principle on the list is anyone can lead anytime. and anywhere. Um, and so I think that probably points to, some of the things that we've been talking about already, where it's just kind of that long term aspect of technical or adaptive challenges. So it really does require that, but also it also speaks to, you don't have to be that person that is, chairing the case plan meeting. You can be, just right, or a member of the group and still lead from the chair that you're in, by the way you present yourself. I can't remember who said, but I think just setting the tone for the meeting, right? Being a good example. How do you ask questions, to engage, the child speaking for themselves, or the case manager because they have a piece of information that needs to be shared. Those types of things. So as you think about that particular principle of leadership, and I've shared some examples, how do you see this principle as being important, in the work, for a CASA?
I mean, in theory, anyone can lead anytime, anywhere, but I'm not sure that's always the best solution. I'm not sure. When you say principles of leadership, are you saying that as a leader you should help everyone around you take the lead occasionally, or I'm not sure what that means. But
well, I think the concept is just that not only the person who's the authority in the room, gets to lead, and you have opportunities to lead at any time. And I don't think KLC would say that everybody should, but I think it's you need to be cognizant of, you're in a position to lead any time. And I think I think it, rather than being a default, like you were saying, oh man, this is all the time and I have to lead all the time. What's your conscious choice in that moment, and how are you choosing to lead in that moment? So I can think of examples where, just because of my experience and my connection with some folks, I've been on, task forces and things like that, and people will automatically come to me and like expect me to do things. Well, my active leadership in that position is to kind of be like, oh, thank you so much for thinking of me, but I'm not the only one at this table that has a dog in the fight. So, hey, person across the room from me, have you thought about XYZ? What do you have to say? Rather than me just being the one that speaks up for everyone. So, yeah, does that, and I don't know, Becky or others, if you have.
Well, this is Becky. I'll just throw out something that just came to mind is that sometimes, excuse me, I've had opportunities where my quote unquote leadership was not to say anything at all, but just to listen. Yeah. So it's not always it's in my brain that it's the authority versus leadership piece that needs to be considered here. You're not necessarily in authority when you're a leader and vice versa. So.
Yeah. Yeah, because one could say that, there are plenty of dictators out there that are certainly taking charge, right? And they're leading in their own way, but, is that really the best thing that should be happening? Are they really engaging other people in doing the work that's going to be best for everybody? So, yeah. Yeah, good. Are there, other comments or questions about that? Leading... Anybody can lead anytime, anywhere. So I don't see Margie right now, but this makes me think of, we've not trademarked it yet, but one of her phrases is our volunteers are advocating inside and outside the courtroom, right? So and really, if you didn't do the work outside of the courtroom, what you're doing inside the courtroom with the court report is obviously it's not going to be very helpful, right? So the lion's share of the work that you guys do as volunteers is really outside the courtroom. So, and that's like, and right now that makes it so much more challenging during COVID, because you can't necessarily go into every every office and every placement and talk to people. You have to do that by phone and video call and email and text, and that makes it that much more challenging for you to then take those actions and lead. And so it's I think that you guys are advocates and leading in ways that I we I think most people would look at it from the outside as being maybe not quite so meaningful, or small actions, but it has a really big impact. Because if you didn't take responsibility for doing those things, then you wouldn't have the information you need to inform the case. So, that's kind of what I think about too on this particular principle. So, okay. Then the third principle is it starts with you and must engage others. So I think when I think about that, it's kind of one of those things of I kind of see the piece of I have to kind of know what my skills and weaknesses are before I approach a problem, to know kind of like who else needs to be engaged in the work, who else are the right people at the table, and then think about how I want to engage those people and how do they want to be engaged in doing the work. But once again, I can't do it by myself, because I'll wear myself out. There's not enough of me to do everything. So we really do have to have a team of people approaching the work that we do. And I think then there's also the component of then, that activity. How do you engage people in a way that engages them in a meaningful way and not just being kind of a token thing? So that's kind of what I think about when I think about that particular principle. So what comes to mind to you about this particular principle, starting with you and then must engage others?
So what's the difference between engaging and persuading others of your perspective?
Well, I think definitely that persuading is, depending on where they're at, that probably might be the next step for them to get them engaged. Because if they're not engaged at all, they need to be at the table. Then try and persuade them to get engaged is probably that would make sense in some situations to me. So that seems to be, for me, that seems like that'd be part of the definition. Yeah.
For me, that means, this is Becky again, sorry, means asking questions.
I also think people have to buy into the fact that progress can be made.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, so to engage people, you kind of have to be able to instill hope that something can happen. Mm-hmm. There is a good outcome for the kiddo, and it's worth, doing something. That's true. You guys do that a lot, don't you? That's a really good example. It's a really good example. Yeah. Good. Okay. Then the fourth principle is your purpose must be clear. And I think once again that goes back to like some of the questions you guys are asking already. Like you're gonna have the best outcome if you have a really good goal in mind as you approach situations. So I know I'm at my best when I have time to sit down before I'm gonna engage in a group that's doing something, having a challenge, to think about, okay, how am I going to engage myself, and what's the best way that I need to engage in this work, to have a bit of a plan about how to challenge myself. And if I'm really on top of it and I have a really good connection with other people in that group, then I'm even communicating that to other people to say, okay, I've told myself, I'm not gonna be the only one that speaks, right? So if I start talking too much, you can nudge me under the table and tell me to remind me to be quiet, or text me, or whatever. So I do that sometimes. Otherwise, like I find that I just then will start going with the normal flow of the conversation and just go into the default mode, which is so much more difficult now because everything's on Zoom. It's easy just to sit there and listen and then get distracted by my email because my email is open and those types of things. So that's kind of what I think about when I think about this issue or this principle of my purpose must be clear. So for you all, what does that bring to mind with your work as a CASA about your purpose must be clear?
I guess when I think about kind of my role as a CASA, one of the things that I remembered from orientation was just a reminder that everybody has a role. It's not my role I need to stay in my lane. I'm not the caseworker. I'm not the biological parent. I'm not the placement. I'm not a lot of things. I mean, my role is important, and that's not to take anything away from it, but I do need to be clear about what my purpose is. So my role, I guess, and I think about that a lot because you want to help your kids and kind of get out of your lane sometimes. Maybe it's just me.
When I see that your purpose must be clear, it makes me think about when I'm initially introducing myself to all the different entities and making sure that I'm not a scary person, that I'm making my purpose clear without seeming like I'm an investigator kind of thing. And I feel like my purpose is to investigate, but investigative people can be kind of creepy. So trying to figure out how to tell people what my purpose is has to be molded to each different entity. Does that make sense?
Hi, this is Joda. I found that my purpose changes with the case. I mean, ultimately, you're there for one person, and that's the child, but where you fit in during the time that you're on the case, that can change a little bit. It's a little more fluid than that. I have found it to be more fluid. Sometimes I sit back, but I have just found the leadership role to be one that changes depending on the circumstances that appear in the case right then. Ultimately, I want my kid and I want her to be in a foster home. But if there's no foster home available, so where does that leadership role go then from at that point?
Right.
So, it changes. It's fluid, I think.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
That's a great point. Yeah, because you're thinking through what's the most important thing that I need to focus on when it comes to advocating for this kid, and there is no foster home right now. So what's the next thing? Yeah, that's a really great example.
And if the case plan goal, depending on what the case plan goal is, if it's reintegration, then your purpose is to help that. Or if it's aging out, then your purpose is to help that, or, and that changes throughout the case, like what you said, Joda.
Danny, I saw you unmuting. Did you have?
I was just sort of thinking about like using that clear purpose as a decision point, because sometimes things get really difficult and messy to know what is the best thing to do in the situation. And so for me, I try to think about like my underlying purpose throughout every decision is to work in the best interest towards the child. And then so when things get a little heady, coming back to that, and that's my clear purpose that I can always come back to then inform kind of my next step.
That's great, and I appreciate that too, because then that means you understand your role, just like Diana was saying, that, and I think this is maybe transition into the next and the last principle, that it's risky. So I think we've thought about, brought up this idea of things being risky because you're putting yourself out there. Sometimes you're being vulnerable, bringing up a question that nobody else is willing to ask. And then when I think about our role as a CASA, there are times when, so the Office of Judicial Administration, who certifies our program, they have a very clear definition of what the CASA's role is. And they're very clear that they want it to be black and white and don't stray into any of those other roles, right? But me, when I'm advocating for the best interest of these kids. I understand there's statute and we don't want to like break those roles or anything, but there are times when it's gray, right? And so we have to sit down and we have to be like, okay, so a good example is, there are certain instances where where we as staff believe it makes sense for a CASA volunteer to also be the educational advocate. These are rare instances, but it happens, right? But Office of Judicial Administration does not want CASAs making educational decisions and signing off on paperwork for that. But we advocate to make that happen and make that exception in the best interest of kids in certain circumstances. So for me, it's, it is risky for at various levels, right? So it could be all the way from when I say that thing, some people might be mad at me because I'm calling somebody out. Saying that thing and holding people responsible for it may, hurt that relationship a little bit with that person, with that agency. It could just make me look stupid, right? Because I'm asking something everybody else knows, but I just don't, right? And it's going to impact my own self-worth, right? Or the way that other people think about me. So kind of the risk, it's kind of a matter of hopefully I'm thinking about that, before I take that action and make an intentional choice where I'm thinking through, is it risky enough, right? Or is it too risky? Because sometimes it's not worth doing if there's not a little bit of risk, right? It's so anyways, that's just kind of how I think about it. So I know we've talked about it being risky already in some previous examples, but does anybody have any additional thoughts or thoughts to add about that with the group? Okay. All right. We have about 7 minutes left. So I did want to give a little bit of kind of a preview of the next content area, but then hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of a better understanding too of kind of the definition of leadership to kind of see what KLC calls their competencies. So this is part of the handout that you all have as well. But they categorize into these 4 different competency areas. So energizing others. So that for me, that part of the definition is about engaging other people, and then managing self, and then intervening skillfully is about engaging myself in the work. And then diagnosing the situation is it's just kind of what are those skills that are helpful when it comes to doing the work. And so under energizing others, we'll go into kind of more detail of this in the next session, but I kind of wanted to just kind of walk through these so people kind of saw them and give people an opportunity to ask questions. But that area of energizing others, there's a lot of issues or competencies listed there, and for me it's kind of about getting to know the stakeholders who are involved in the work, to help be able to come to a collective idea of where we're going to be heading, but then also it's all about kind of the process, about how we're going to engage people in the work, so that creating a trustworthy process and working across factions. So who needs to be involved and how do they need to be involved to do the work? And then the managing self piece is all about making sure you know yourself and how others talk about you, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and I like that they include in there the taking care of yourself piece. So how are you doing that in a way that doesn't burn you out? So you're the person that has to do all the work in every committee meeting that you're a part of, or in everything that you do. And then intervening skillfully. So that just really highlights some of the key areas that the Kansas Leadership Center has seen as being useful in how you yourself intervene in doing the work. And so it's just interesting that taking care of yourself is part of managing yourself, but then in one way in intervening skillfully is giving the work back, right? So sometimes as as a leader, you're like, that's a really great idea. How can I help you make progress on doing that activity that you've suggested? So, and then we talked about this already a lot today, just kind of the making conscious choices. So, just it's not about doing everything all the time, but about, are you making a conscious choice in how you're intervening? So we'll get more into detail with that. And then diagnosing the situation. So there's some interesting language here, and I think some of this Kansas Leadership Center has changed, but so we've already talked about distinguishing technical versus adaptive, but one of my favorites is exploring tough interpretations. So how can you kind of challenge other people's thinking about a situation from a different view or a different interpretation, whether or not you hold that interpretation or view. Putting it out there as a point of discussion can be really, really helpful in kind of understanding what's going on here with whatever the situation is. And then taking the temperature, is about, what's risky and what's important. What do we need to pay attention to? So anyways, that hopefully gives you a little bit of a framework for more details of the Kansas Leadership Center model of leadership. So does anybody have any questions about any of these in particular as they reviewed them? They want to ask now? Before we move on? Okay. All right, well, we'll get into them. So I did want to show you all, so there are resources available from the Kansas Leadership Center if you have interest in any of these topics. So if you go to kansasleadershipcenter.org, and they have a calendar, their webinars, I think, are probably the best and greatest resource that they have. I think they call them web chats. So when you go to their website, you hit on calendar, and it takes you to this page, and then scroll down, and then they just have their calendar of events, and most of them are open to the public for free. And so most of their video chats are around one of those leadership competencies. So they have a few that are coming up: explore tough interpretations, manage your vulnerabilities and triggers, work across factions, speak from the heart to the heart. And so I would encourage you to take advantage of those and participate. And I think you get a certificate at the end, so if you do participate in any of those, you can turn those in for continuing ed credit for us. So yeah, take a look at those and participate. They also have other opportunities that I think once they get back to hosting training in person, those things will be here as well, and you can participate in those. I found them to be very, very helpful. So I encourage you to take a look at those. And yeah, are there any final questions or comments from anybody as we close?